Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, friends, for this gathering. Thank you for the occasion to commemorate and honor Kenan Rifai. And thank you to our dear mother, Jamal Nur Hoja. It's not often in life that you actually get to see your mother 30 years into your life. So I'm going to start with a quote from Kenan Rifai. He says, "Spiritual knowledge is not enough for those who carry the responsibility of guiding. How can a murshid or a teacher carry out a relationship with his or her students if he doesn't know anything about the social life of his time?" The world around us is changing, my friends, and is changing rapidly, and the pace of change continues to accelerate. If we think about the dervishes in the Devran, in the whirling, we have to be like them. We have to keep one foot, the one that's closest to the heart, stationary, even as the other foot keeps circling the world. All of us are caught up in this combination of stillness and adaptation. If we want to become and remain relevant, we have to model the dervishes. If we are to somehow keep bringing the timeless teachings of tasawwuf and make it relevant in a timely way to each and every generation. Very few teachers have had to undergo a more turbulent process of adaptation than the Ottoman Republic period Sufi master Kenan Rifai. Sufis have found themselves living through very turbulent times before, whether we're talking about giants like Attar and Hazrat Mawlana Jalaluddin Rumi living through the Mongol period, or whether we're thinking of Amir Abdul Qadir al-Jazairi living through the colonial period. We've lived through trauma, and many have even been a part of restoring a sense of barakah to a world that seems to have gone mad with conflict. Kenan Rifai's age also saw first the rapid modernization of the Ottoman Empire, followed by World War I, the ascendancy of Ataturk, and the destruction of centuries-old models of Sufi life, sultanate, and caliphate. Let's take some time first to ponder his Sufi teachings, and then to come back about some of the ways in which Kenan Rifai himself kept one foot stationed in timeless teachings, and with the other foot kept turning to make his teachings relevant. So we'll start with Kenan Rifai and Rumi's Masnavi. Other Mevlevi teachers have called Kenan Rifai's Listen the most important book to be published in the English language in the last 70 years. All of us, scholars, students, and those of us who seek this path of burning, are indebted to Jamal Nur Hoja and the friends in Turkad for having subsidized the translation of this wonderful book titled Listen. Usually the Masnavi, Mawlana's masterpiece, the Quran in Persian, as it is called, has always been read as a journey. In the first volume, it's always read as a journey from the state of the ney, the reed flute, to the station of Imam Ali. The Masnavi is not so much a book as it is a path that each and every single one of us have to walk. We begin with the state of the ney, feeling cut off and isolated, alone and hurting. We want to get to that station of the perfected human being, the Insan Kamel, the station of Ali. The story of the ney, the reed flute, is well known. We're cut off from our divine origin. We are in anguish. We burn and we yearn to get back home. our primordial experience suffering through this fire of love. Holes are burnt into us. Holes have to be burnt into the nay. And it's then and only then that we can experience the kiss of the musician who breathes spirit, air, life into us. It's only when we're made hollow of our own ego that there's an opening created into which the Spirit of God flows. In short, there is suffering, real suffering to endure on this path of love. But it's only to empty of ourselves, of our selfishness. So we start with loneliness, agony, and feeling cut off because the Prophet told us to speak to people at the level of their understanding. Speak to people where they are. And for most of us, where we are is a state of feeling cut off from the divine presence. As Mawlana Rumi himself says of his own ugly, crude, ill-mannered, no adab disciples, if they were already beautiful, he says, I myself would have become their disciple. Right? So we don't set out on this path of burning because we're already beautiful. We come because we have the aspiration that by the grace of God, the Prophet, and the friends of God, we hope to become beautiful. The Masnavi is a journey from nayness, from the state of being like the nay, broken, to becoming who and what we already are. And we must become again. The story of Imam Ali is, of course, already well known. Ali defeats a mighty warrior in battle, subdues him, and sits on his chest to finish him. The defeated and humiliated warrior spits on the face of Ali. Rumi says was the of every prophet, and every gets up from the chest of this fallen warrior and puts his sword back in its sheath. The warrior wonders why Ali would relinquish at precisely the moment of victory, and Ali says that he is the lion of God. He will only be moved by the face of God, not by his own whims and anger. He is the one that has conquered his own ego. He is the real mountain, kuh, not some piece of straw, kah, that's going to be blown here and there by the winds of emotion. This transition from nay to Ali to the Insan Kamil is familiar to us from many Masnavi commentaries. But here Kenan Rifai does something new and unexpected. He sees the end in the very beginning, prefiguring the Insan Kamil already being present in the broken nay. Even when he's addressing the story of the nay, he can already witness what is awaiting us at the end of the path, the fully realized human being. Kenan Rifai says, citing Yunus Emre, there is inside me an I, hidden within I. It is the secret that we cannot see in ourselves, but the friends of God can see in us. They see a beauty inside us that we are blind to ourselves. This is why we need those mirrors. It's not unlike the story of Fariduddin Attar, tells us about the simorgh before the birds have even set out. But of course we won't know the secret until we set out on the path. Kenan Rifai goes on to say about the nay, the reed is also a symbol of the erenler, those that have spiritually arrived. These are people united with God. So we feel separated, but we're actually already with Allah. They are also people who've experienced the countless suffering of exile in distance from God and the countless torments of loss before arriving at their station. The arrived, also called the Evliya, communicate their torment in burning tones like the reed flute in order to awaken people who are complacent. What awakens us from the state of sleep and slumber is nothing but ashk, nothing but divine love unleashed upon this world. For Kenan Rifai, this love is the power of God propelling the seeker beyond the love of material world and bodily existence. He goes on to say, it's when a person attains the secrets of dying before death, that is, when you mature enough to annihilate the bad and ugly states of yourself, that the veil of forgetfulness, of heedfulness from God is removed. Love of God, this burning love, is the force that brings a person such maturity. It's when the heart is filled that you attain to the greatest love. He also ends the story of Imam Ali by coming back to that same line of poetry. There is inside me an eye, hidden within I. Ali goes on to say, I am illuminated and a shadow made out of light. My only function is to raise the veils before God's servants and Allah. For that reason, I'm not a veil, but a remover of veils. I am a sword of God filled with jewels. I quicken, I do not kill those who meet me in battle. He says, those who are aware of the reality of the situation know that by my hand you are freed from selfishness, from your satanic qualities, and you attain to eternal life. So now that we have some sense of Kenan Rifai's deep immersion in the Masnavi, I want to come back and talk about three major adaptations that as this novice, unlearned person, I have seen in Kenan Rifai's life and teaching. These are three themes that to me are skillful ways in which Kenan Rifai adapts to the turbulent world of the 19th and the 20th century. The first one is a clarification of the nafs, of the ego self, not merely as the self, but most specifically as our selfish tendencies. This has been one of the common criticisms of Sufi teachings, particularly from feminist scholars and others, that historical tasawwuf has had a tendency to denigrate the body, to not sufficiently value family relationships, and that the negation of the self can actually be a distraction from that desire to live a whole and holistic existence. It's not so much that Kenan Rifai is saying something that hasn't been said before. It's more the subtlety, and if you would excuse the irony, the directness with which he states it. So let's go to the story that I know is a favorite of Jamal Nur Hoja's, the story of the Chinese and the Greek painters. Each one has to come up with a beautiful painting. The Chinese come up with a masterful painting. All that the Greeks do, and the Greeks are of course the Sufis, is that they polish and they polish and they polish the wall until it is so illuminated that the image that shines on their wall is even more beautiful than the original. Right? This is of course a reminder for us of the need to keep polishing, keep emptying the self of our selfishness. When Kenan Rifai Hoja gets to this particular story in the Masnavi, this is the commentary that he offers on it. He says, that room is the heart of the Sufi. which is pure of all dust and rust, like the most brilliant of mirrors. It's such mirrors that is the heart of the advanced Sufis that the divine self-disclosure occurs in. If you ask what it is that they clean to bring their hearts into such a state, they cleanse it of rage, of arrogance, of selfhood, of hypocrisy, of lust, and of passion. Now, this is a familiar story to us. We know this from the Masnavi, that everything that we read in the Quran and the Masnavi is taking place inside us. In reading the Masnavi, we are the lion, we are the rabbit, the hare, we are the well that we leap into, and we ourselves are the redemption. It's all from us, it's all in us, and it's all for us. The us isn't some mere humanistic self, but it's a human being fashioned in the image of God, having the breath of God flowing inside us, perpetually refreshed and recast in the loving glance of Allah. If you go back to Kenan Rifai's commentary on this famous story, you see that what he's advocating isn't negating the human self, but most specifically polishing and removing the egoistic qualities of ourself. It's not that the self has to die, not that the human has to die, but that when we speak about death before dying, the death is a death of greed, the death of ego, the death of hypocrisy, the death of lust, of passion, of selfishness. What comes after that death and before the physical death, of course, is life, abundant, luminous life filled with love. And what glory emerges when that life comes. Here's what happens, Kenan Rifai says, after the selfishness has vanished. It's only then that the heart's mirror becomes divested of all of the worldly filth. And then the heart becomes a mirror, a reflector of the self-disclosure of divine essence and attributes with no limit. For the mirror of the heart, like the beauty reflected in it, has no limit. Only the heart is eternal with Him. Those who polish their hearts with the love of Allah see a different kind of beauty shining there every instant. Every breath they witness another one of God's infinite beauties. The second major adaptation that I see in the teachings of Kenan Rifai is women's participation and leadership. We're living through an extraordinary period of female leadership in many Muslim communities. Whether it's Malala Yousafzai in Pakistan, Shirin Ebadi in Iran, our own Jamal Nurhoja in Turkey, Amina Wadud in the US, as well as extraordinary female scholars like Juliana Hammer, Keisha Ali, Sachiko Murata, and many others who have widened and deepened our understanding of Islam. In this way, Kenan Rifai, along with his near contemporary Hazrat Inayat Khan of India, were pioneers. The key practice here was fellowship, sohbet, with a completed human being. The human being who has wiped the mirror of her own heart so that the beauty, Jamal, of the light of God, Nur, shines on through. It's this magical and mystical fellowship that harkens back to the sweet presence of actually sitting in the presence of the Prophet. Here we see that Kenan Rifai was remarkable among his peers. His first teacher was his mother, Valida Sultan Hadija Jinan, who initiated him on the path of tasawwuf. In his case, the experience with a female murshida, not unlike Ibn Arabi, prepares him for a life of deep spiritual fellowship with women. He remembers his mother as having said to him, "You're not alone, I am with you." Towards the end of Kenan's life, he remembers yearning for the companionship of his blessed mother. Those of us that had the honor of visiting the Dargah of Kenan Rifai saw that his own room used to be the room of his mother, and that her maqam has been preserved and set aside just as his has been. Kenan Rifai was also known as having significant female disciples, including Nazla Sultan, Samia Jamal, Samia Ayvardi, Safiya Erol, Jamal Nur Hoja's mother Meshkure Hanum, Zehra Sultan, Nezihe Araz, and many others. His welcoming of female murids also crossed religious lines. One of his murids, Sophie Huri, was the daughter of a Christian priest. She famously described him as combining the majestic qualities of an Old Testament prophet combined with a waterfall of compassion and kindness. In Kenan Rifai's view of women, in the context of this spiritual fellowship, this sohbat, he says, affection for women comes from being able to witness God in the mirror of their existence. What I find particularly touching is that his appreciation of the feminine was connected to real friendship with real women. It's easy to speak of the feminine and remain ignorant of the daily trials and tribulations that society, and let's be honest, men, place on women. Kenan Rifai seems to have been a beautiful exception here. In fact, his own relationship with Samia Jamal seems to have echoes of what I have seen of the relationship between the Prophet and Hazrat Khadija. He says about her, "She was a friend with whom I could share my ideals and a human on whom I could rest my tired head." You find virtually the verbatim description about the Prophet towards Khadija. He says that his greatest joy in life was sharing spiritual knowledge with Samiha Jamal. When she asked him what could she do to mirror this love back to him, his only answer was, "Love me. Love me so that I can love you." But my dear, know the meaning of what I mean by love me. Love me means love all that I love. Love all of humanity. Love itself and Allah. Was Samia Ayvardi, who has left her own indelible mark on Turkish Sufism. She, of course, was the main gateway for the late and great Anne-Marie Schimmel to this lived world of beauty. We're all gathered here because there is now a multi-generational legacy of female leadership from Kenan Rifai, passed on to Samia Ayvardi, to Mashkura Hanum, to Jamal Nur Sargut. This model is hard to see in many other places in the Muslim world. Ordinary blessing, witness it. We see this love, this burning of love me as one that survives death. In Kenan Rifai's own burial ground, we see him being entrusted to the Mother Earth next to his mother, surrounded by his female murids. What Kenan Rifai emphasizes about women is their extraordinary capacity for love. He connects this to the teachings of Ibn Arabi, and he connects it to the teachings of Mawlana Rumi. Most of all, he connects it to the Prophet. Men and women, he says, are two halves of a whole. We cannot become whole if our relationship with one another is broken. The third element that I see in the life of Kenan Rifai is the transfer of tasawwuf from the dargah to the university. If we take a look at a trajectory of Kenan Rifai's life, which spans 1867 to 1950, we get a better sense of the full turbulence of the Ottoman Empire and later on, the Turkish Republic. Kenan is born during the Tanzimat period. The year after he is born, the Imperial Ottoman Lycée at Galatasaray is established. The young Kenan studies there, and he's exposed to European as well as Islamic sciences. If you trace his life, you see that he was an instructor in Galatasaray, in the Iranian school, in the German supervisor of the Ministry of Postal Services. He serves as the principal of education in Balıkesir, Skopje, Trabzon, and Medina. He teaches Turkish at Fener Greek High School for 13 years. In other words, his own life mirrors Ottoman cosmopolitanism. Let's just remember that Istanbul, Asitane, the threshold, Dar-es-Saadat, the capital of the largest and most glorious of the Muslim empires, actually had a Muslim minority population until 1900. For Kenan Rifai, interaction with Jews and Christians was not abstract. He's talking about his neighbors, his friends, his students. This is what is reflected in his teaching: to serve any person, no matter what their religious background, is a means of serving Allah. It's one thing to speak theologically about pluralism. It's another thing when you've spent 12 years of your life teaching Jews and Christians. He ends up saying all religions are one in essence, ranging from the primitive religion to that of Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and Islam. They're all one in the forms of meaning. He famously opens himself up again and again to incorporate knowledge, wisdom, beauty, and truth, learning 8 languages: Turkish, French, German, Arabic, Persian, Greek, Circassian, and the last one, English, which he starts learning at age 80. As the world around him changes, he continues to adapt his own understanding, even as he remains rooted in the Ottoman Sufi tradition. He says, what we considered as being right yesterday is proven to be wrong today. Tomorrow as well, we will realize that what we know today is wrong or incomplete. In fact, progress demands this. Progress, of course, is one of the code words of the 19th century. It can and has been used to convey a triumphalist, Eurocentric march towards one model of Western modernity. Kenan Rifai seems to have had a much more subtle understanding of progress, the need to open up to advances in scientific learning while preserving the spiritual and mystical treasures of the Islamic tradition. He says, to deal with the content of the unseen world is not possible with the understandings of the previous century. The noblest behavior of our century is to accept its incompleteness in explaining the truth. So let's think about this move out of the dargah, and I'll conclude here. Of course, we know the turbulent history out of the Ottoman period. The Sultanate is abolished in 22, the Caliphate in 24, the madrasas are shut down, and in 1925 there's a crackdown on Sufi dargah-based Sufism. This is the turbulent world in which Kenan Rifai is coming to adulthood. Tasawwuf had been woven into the very fabric of Ottoman society. at every scholarly, mystical, popular, and political level. If tasawwuf were to survive in the Republican period, it would have to find new roots in this new soil. So he undertakes the decision that in retrospect has proven to be powerful and visionary. He makes the decision to shift the focus of Sufi life from the traditional dargah to the university. Amma akademi olarak açılar ter. The academy will open the way, he says. We see the continuation of this practice under Jamal Noor's leadership. Turked has been extraordinarily active in the promotion of scholarship on Sufism, whether in establishing the professorship at UNC, filled by Juliana Hammer, to the chair at Beijing University. Turked has operated some of the most visible conferences for the study of Sufism on figures ranging from Mawlana Rumi, Rumi and Women, Sultan Veled, Shams Tabrizi, Abul Hasan Harakani, and many others. These conferences begin to bring together distinguished Turkish scholars and international scholars and continue Kenan Rifai's mission of bringing the Sufi tradition from the dargah to the academy. In short, the life of Kenan Rifai, whose dargah was the last dargah to be built in Istanbul in 1908, traces the life of a dervish, one foot remaining firmly planted in the richness of the ancient path of overflowing divine love. The other foot whirling around the world, keeping up with this rapidly changing universe that we find ourselves in. The skill and grace with which Kenan Rifai carried out this dance has made him one of the most relevant Sufi masters of the 20th century. And now, with Jamal Noor Hoja, this legacy spills over to the 21st. May this legacy continue to shed a beautiful light onto the places in this world that are most in need of this teaching. Ash Golson.